The title of this video is What is Forgiving and How Do You Do It? Just about everybody has heard about forgiving, that we ought to do it. But when it actually comes right down to doing it, most people struggle with it. I had a very dear relative that used to say, I can forgive, but I can't forget. Well, even when I was young, that really never sounded like forgiving to me. But I recognized the difficulty she was having with people who had been cruel to her. And no doubt she heard somebody else say that once and she thought it was a good idea and made sense to her. So she adopted it into her own philosophy of life. Well, in this video, I'm going to explore what forgiving is and just how to forgive. What should we forgive? So, first of all, let's discuss this. What is it that you hold that cause suffering to such uh, strong emotions like maybe anger or fear or guilt or resentment or criticism or betrayal, judges, um, blame, grief, heartache, heartbreak? Virtually everybody gets caught from time to time with some of these, and often they destroy relationships. So let's talk about forgiving. How do you do that? Forgiveness is actually a form of letting go. And in a spiritual context, it's actually a form of surrender. And what surrender means in this case is complete, total letting go of all resistance, all holding on, and all attachment. And forgiving has a very beautiful quality. It washes you clean. It leaves you refreshed. It creates a feeling of being liberated because when you deeply forgive, you dissolve the very cause and the core of resentment. So, how do you begin to do this? Well, when you think of forgiving, you probably think, first of all, about those who have wronged you in some way. But forgiveness is most important when it's used in relationship with yourself. And here's my favorite self forgiveness statement for you to start with. I forgive myself for not having forgiven myself. I formulated this statement because it is so easy to hold yourself in judgment and to be tough on yourself, especially when you seem to come up short of all the standards that you've set for yourself. So right now, just say to yourself, I forgive myself for not having forgiven myself. And you'll notice it feels good just to say that. Now, furthermore, once you forgive yourself of whatever burden you've been carrying, you're going to find it so much easier to forgive others. And this is the reason for self forgiveness, because it opens your heart to bring healing to yourself and to the relationships that you have with other people. And it does this by reconnecting you with your own heart, and it brings an openness, a receptivity, a reconnection, and a freedom from carrying the burdens of grudges and guilt and the worry reactions that we often carry with us. So it's actually a way for you to experience a refreshing awakening to a new life with no baggage. And there are just three basic steps on how to forgive. So you must begin with self forgiveness. That's step one. Because if you can't forgive yourself, you're not likely to be very successful in forgiving anybody else. And before you can experience deep forgiveness, you've got to explore what you're holding on to that you need to let go of. What is it that blocks entrance into the spaciousness of your heart? And usually it's some form of resentment or guilt or blame. So, for instance, What may start out as a frustration, if it's held over time, it'll incubate and it'll grow into resentment. And then resentment becomes anger, and anger can become a bitterness and even hatred and revenge. And over time, it can settle into a long held grudge and bitterness, and sometimes even depression. It's all quite an amazing process. And it usually happens without you giving hardly any thought to it. Before you know it, you find yourself out of control, and it is in control of you. Now, in either case of not forgiving another or forgiving yourself, you want to search within your consciousness a bit deeper for any belief in a wrongdoing. Where do you judge yourself for being wrong or lacking? And recognize that you may think that what you did was justified. You may even think that you don't need forgiving. But if there is a part of your consciousness that finds you have done something in violation with any inner moral, ethical, or spiritual code or belief, even a subconscious one, you will perpetuate guilt and the consequences of guilt. One factor that makes forgiveness difficult for some people is believing their emotions are beyond their control. The second reason that people have difficulty with forgiveness stems from how to regard those who were particularly abusive to them. Maybe there was betrayal, or you were lied to, or you were cheated, or somebody stole something from you, or you were physically or emotionally abused. And in such cases, the idea of forgiveness is seen as unreasonable and maybe even overwhelming. Forgiving someone who has done something severe seems in so many ways like you're letting the person get away with something that they should be held accountable for. So then the question is, how do you forgive a really big offense? When people ask themselves how to forgive, they often recoil, thinking that forgiveness is somehow condoning an offensive action, or it requires releasing the person from paying a penalty for a violation. If someone has done something to harm another, there may well be consequences that they have to face. But through forgiveness, you free yourself. So when you say, I forgive you, you are really saying to yourself that you're not going to harbor hatred, resentment, or any further pain over what has happened. It's recognizing basically the past is past, it's gone, and therefore it can't be changed. So it's really just letting go of something from the past and letting yourself go free. Now, sometimes it's pretty difficult to think about letting go of some really big offense. And if the offense is a severe one, that may be just too big of a chunk to bite off at once. So think of this example. If you were going to start lifting weights for exercise, you wouldn't go up to a 300-pound weight and try to lift it. Your inability to lift such a great weight would make you think that that's what weightlifting is all about. It's not for you. On the other hand, if you start with a smaller weight, say a 10-pound weight, 20-pound weight, a 30-pound weight, you might find it fun and even beneficial. So with forgiveness, you don't want to start with someone who is really cruel or unjust or abusive. You can actually start by practicing developing an attitude of forgiveness at whatever capacity or level you feel comfortable doing it. And in time, you can reach up to the deeper pain and let it go. Just keep in mind, forgiveness is really about your own healing. and being gentle with yourself. Did you know that there are actually health benefits to understanding how to forgive? I saw an article in a local paper about the physical effects of anger. Now, this isn't the kind of article you don't usually see in a local newspaper, but I guess this study was so well designed and the outcomes so profound, it made it into many local papers. And this article talked about how couples who showed hostility during fighting with their partner experienced hardening of the arteries. So, what psychologists did was they did CT scans on the coronary arteries of 150 couples, and they found that some who had marital fights had scores so high they were advised to consult a doctor. Anger, resentment, and guilt are the main reasons or the main issues that are addressed with forgiveness. But if you're challenged with trying to forgive someone of a really egregious offense, then you may end up being more unforgiving of yourself because of not being able to let it all go. And so that could actually compound the problem. So what you do is you start practicing forgiveness and letting go on small things, like maybe a clerk or a waiter who might be impatient or maybe even rude with you, or maybe a friend who forgets something that was important to you, or a coworker who is a bit demanding, or somebody who makes a mistake that costs you some money. Think of it as an experiment in understanding what forgiveness is, and you are merely practicing how to forgive. Now, unless you live in a cave, you're going to find all kinds of situations that you can practice on because just about everybody tends to be inconsistent and often will violate your comfort zone or they'll let you down. So realize that you are considering forgiving the person, even if you're not condoning their rudeness or their mistake or their selfishness or their abuse. Now, if a person were living fully from their heart and their soul, they would be kind, loving, considerate, apologetic. But few people are in that kind of space 24 hours a day. And so they'll revert to ego based reactions. And just about everyone engages in behaviors that they or others don't like or agree with. Now, where did they learn these reactions? Well, from being mistreated when they were growing up, maybe from watching others, seeing how others handled situations, maybe from developing inner insecurities and a need to be in control, and from decades of practicing survival and getting what they want, even if it's at the expense of other people. So now, when someone mistreats you, you can know that they too are human. They get caught in their perceptions and their stories, just like you do. And they'll fall back on their defenses because that's what they know. And maybe that's the only way they know. So you can open your heart and mercifully embrace their need to be rude or insensitive with compassion and understanding and patience and spaciousness. Recognize they're operating from a painful place within themselves, and they're apparently not skillful enough themselves to know any other way to do it. So this makes it a whole lot easier for you to answer the question for yourself on how to forgive such a person. The only reason someone would cause you harm in any way is if they are struggling and suffering in some way themselves. They may not be at a place where they can be patient or understand or kind all the time. So from time to time, they slip into a frame of mind that they probably don't like either. and they say or do something from a painful and closed place within themselves. All you have to do is touch them with some understanding and a possibility of forgiveness. And this opens you to a deeper, truer place within yourself. Now, haven't you ever been a little rude or impatient or perhaps indifferent to someone else? And when you react that way and reflect on it, you might even cringe a little bit because you realize how you cut yourself off from yourself, certainly cut yourself off from your heart when you act that way. But then when we meet others with openness and mercy and generosity and love, we feel really good inside because these are qualities of our soul. And when we express them, we connect with the very core of our inner peaceful soul presence. So the first step is to determine on what specific issue do you need to forgive and release yourself. Discern what the inner voices are of blame, judgment, criticism. And I'd like you to think about it for a little bit. What is there about yourself that is not what you would like it to be? And that could be a trait as well as something that you said or did. It could be a lack of a forgiving attitude towards somebody. What would you like change in your inner worlds? This is step one. Step two, identify another person with whom you have an issue. Is there anybody in your life now, or maybe in the past, with whom you had something unresolved? And consider that even if you think you've resolved it, if there was ever a point of contention or resentment with somebody, you might want to explore your inner space with them and see if you are really, truly, and deeply clear on that. And then step three, you need to affirm the willingness and the intention to forgive yourself and let it go. And this needs to be done sincerely and from the heart. The backdrop needed for all of this is a willingness to forgive. You need the intention to forgive, to let go of yourself and then anyone else. Now, what if that person did something really terrible? First of all, forgiveness does not mean condoning. It doesn't mean that you become a doormat. It doesn't mean the person gets away scot-free. It means you do, because forgiveness means you've decided to release any fear, resentment, or guilt or blame, because these are reactions that are damaging to you. Forgiving means you recognize you are responsible only for yourself and not anyone else. Forgiveness also helps you recognize you can let go of all the judgments that you hold about yourself. The object of forgiveness might be yourself for something you said or did, or maybe an aspect of your personality. Have you heard the expression, I put my foot in my mouth? It's an odd and kind of a funny statement that means to say something embarrassing or inappropriate, often unintentionally, causing you to feel awkward. But once it's out, you can't take it back. All you can do is apologize. But then you need to forgive yourself. To forgive what you think is unforgivable always seems to me like something only saints were capable of doing. Only the most holy people are often regarded as special, especially capable of letting go completely. And it even seemed to me that these people had some kind of a special gift from God that enable them to go on forgiving of some of the most heinous behaviors. One factor that makes forgiving something you think is unforgivable is the strong emotional reactions that are triggered by what some people do. When you have a strong reaction, it can seem to come out of nowhere and even beyond your control. In addition, if someone has done something particularly terrible, forgiving the person can seem like you're letting the person get away with their actions. And we have some kind of a built-in need to see that justice is done and the transgressor pays for what they have done. Shouldn't they be held accountable? Well, of course, there are consequences for behaviors, and often there's compensation, there's reparation, or there's a penalty that must be paid. But that really has nothing to do with you forgiving in order to free yourself of carrying the negative emotions into your future. Have you ever felt guilty for not forgiving? Have you ever thought that you'd feel a whole lot better if you were able to forgive completely? Maybe you tried to be forgiving. You might have thought, I said it out loud and I have forgiven the person. And then I find myself hoping that karma will get them and you still hold some resentment. Well, then that wasn't complete forgiveness. Real deep forgiveness is one of the best practices that leads to healing of deep wounds that you have been carrying, maybe all the way back in childhood. And when you say that you forgive yourself or someone else, it can lead to a feeling of being cleansed, relieved, lightened. It enables you to lighten the load that you've been carrying. It is, of course, more challenging with deeply painful experiences, but to forgive the unforgivable is certainly possible with understanding. And there are 5 things to understand about forgiveness that will help you be successful with it. First of all, forgiveness is a way to set yourself free. It's about releasing you from anger, bitterness, shame, revenge, and regret. You don't have to be a saint to forgive. As you forgive yourself, you set yourself free from feeling like a victim. When you don't forgive yourself, you brood with dark feelings while refusing to let go of something from the past. Regardless of what happened, the past is the past. It's over. It's done. It's no longer a reality. However, as long as you hold on to your position or your judgment about what happened, you keep it alive as if it's still a condition or experience that's happening. And therefore, you continue to suffer. All right. So, the first thing, forgiveness is a way for you to set yourself free. Secondly, forgiveness does not mean that you forget, but it does mean you release the charge on the memory. So you can retain the wisdom from the experience and release any negative causes that led to the experience. When you forgive, you're able to be objective, neutral, and you're then able to reflect on what happened without being pulled into the drama of the event. When you're neutral about the event, you can use the experience to make wiser decisions or choices in the future. And this is how you stop repeating patterns which were keeping you in a loop before you did the forgiving. Now, if you don't forgive, and you try to ignore or even suppress what happened, you energize the very pattern at a subconscious level, and you further establish a toxic, subtle energy program. Whatever happened was there to teach you something. So use it as a catalyst to move on with your life in a healthier way. So forgiving doesn't mean that you forget. It just means that you no longer have a charge on the memory. Number three, forgiveness doesn't mean that people get away with bad behavior. They can certainly be held accountable for their actions, but you release any toxic emotions that take a toll on you. So forgiving is really about releasing yourself from the pain of your negative emotions. It's not about thinking of yourself as better than anyone else. It's not about being a bigger person than the one who committed the offensive act. All bad behaviors stem from internal pain that a person is carrying. Most people's behaviors are dictated by defense mechanisms based on the beliefs the person has. So if they misjudge you and they say or do things attacking you or hurting you, they're actually operating from their wounds and their pain. And until they address their inner pain and issues, they'll continue to suffer the consequences of their actions. Abusive people are in pain. Cheating people are in pain. Nasty people are in pain. Complainers are in pain. Pain internally is what's driving all suffering and all unkindness in the world. Everything painful that has ever happened to you at the hands of others is a result of them trying to ease their own pain or displace that pain. They do it in misguided ways. And once you realize this, then you're able to understand why they do what they do. That doesn't exonerate. It can help you to have a little bit more understanding and maybe even some compassion for their suffering. Once you have a better understanding of why they do what they do, you're going to be better able to forgive them. So, number three, forgiveness does not mean that people get away with bad behaviors. Number four, people do often react irrationally. People think they are rational and logical, but their conclusions are based on partial information and erroneous beliefs. And this causes them to make self-defeating choices. So from your point of view, you probably won't understand why a person acted the way they did. And you actually don't need to in order to forgive them. It's quite sufficient to know everybody carries pain, and the pain causes them to act the way they do. Until you forgive, you can end up rethinking the reasons and causes something happened. And it's like trying to put a puzzle together when there's missing pieces because you don't have all the pieces. You don't know everything. Most of the reactions that people have are playing off of unconscious or subconscious programs that were set in place when they were children. And they have no idea how those things got there. They don't remember what happened, but the subconscious holds the memory. So these emotional wounds can cause people to act unpredictably, certainly illogically. They can cause a person to take even dangerous risks, making choices against their own best interest, even self-sabotage. And as a result, they take drastic actions. And you don't need to know all the psychological reasons why a person does what they do. It's enough to know they're in pain. And that understanding is the foundation of forgiveness. Number five, forgiving doesn't heal the other person. They have to heal themselves. Although you forgiving them can make it easier for them to heal in some instances. Someone may have asked you for forgiveness, and you may have said, "Of course I forgive you." Nevertheless, what do you do when they repeat the same type of act? when they violate your space again? Well, this presents a real challenge, doesn't it? And this is where you feel like you have to draw a line on whether you can forgive the unforgivable, the repeating of offensive actions. Most people change very slowly over a very long time because they have deep wounds, distorted ideas, faulty memory, difficult challenges. And so people will usually repeat the same behaviors, even when they don't want to. And a reason for this is that most patterns that cause behaviors are in the subconscious, and it takes time and dedication to get into the subconscious and change it. Now, this brings us back to point 4 about coming to a place of understanding as to why a person does what they do. In many cases, they're not malicious. They may feel quite badly about what they've done, but they may have felt as if they couldn't help themselves. And that is the power of subconscious programming. Most of people's negative emotions and behaviors are driven by subconscious programs and beliefs. And in addition, some people are simply wired differently from the majority, and it causes them to have offensive behaviors, sometimes in wildly erratic ways. Some people have mental disorders. It makes this a whole lot more challenging to deal with. And this requires a special level of understanding and patience. So if you've been interacting with people like this, and if they're not seriously pursuing help, you may need to consider removing yourself from frequent interaction with them. But that doesn't preclude your forgiving them, even if it feels like it's a challenge to forgive them. Only you can choose to make your life better, and the same is true of others. You can heal much in your life by saying out loud that you forgive yourself of each item that plagues your mind. As you keep repeating forgiveness, you'll find the intensity of your reactions diminish. And eventually, you're going to find a very deep, sustained peace. Now, in the remainder of this video, I'm going to lead you through a meditative process so you can resolve the question for yourself: how do I forgive myself and others? This is really an important question to answer because sometimes forgiveness seems to be quite difficult, and especially when one has suffered greatly. So, through this process, you will come to understand forgiveness to a greater depth by engaging in the process. Now, since this is a meditative process, you should only do this when you will not be disturbed or distracted. You should not be driving or doing anything else for the remainder few minutes of this video. And you're going to find that this is more effective if you do it with your eyes closed. So now begin with a deep breath in through your nose and exhale gently through your mouth. Feel yourself relaxing and bring to mind someone for whom you feel or once felt some anger, hatred, or resentment. Perhaps you were victimized by this person in some way, or you blame them for something they said or did. And this could even be someone you knew a long time ago who hurt. And maybe the person has even passed on. So it could be a grandparent, for instance, or a friend of your parents, or it could be your parents, or a brother or sister, or some other relative. But it could be a teacher, a schoolmate, a coworker, a business associate, or maybe somebody that you had an intimate relationship with. But very softly and gently allow an image or a feeling or a sense of them to gather before you. Imagine in your mind an image of that person standing before you, several feet in front of you. And while that person's presence gathers there, for just a moment, sense a spaciousness in your heart opening that contains the possibility of forgiveness. And in your imagination, say to them, I'm willing to forgive and release you for whatever harm you caused me and for whatever you did or failed to do. I am willing to forgive you and release you for whatever harm you caused me. And for whatever you did or failed to do. Now just let them be there in the presence of your willingness to forgive and say, I forgive you. I release you. I let you go. I forgive you. I release you. I let you go. And be willing to let go of the hurt and the pain. Let whatever barriers there are between you relax and melt in the forgiveness. This is so that your heart may be free and your burdens may be lightened. Now, using your imagination, imagine that there's a small jail cell right in the center of your chest. This is called your heart center, and only you have the key. In this closed jail is the one you need to forgive, the one who needs your forgiveness. And you've been holding them in your jail, in your heart. But now you have the power to release them. And that's now what you're going to do. So open the jail door and say to them, I am willing to forgive you and release you. I am willing to forgive you and release you. You're sending intentions of forgiveness and spaciousness with no thought of anything in return. They don't even have to change the way they feel about you because you are releasing the weight that you have been carrying. You say to them, I'm willing to forgive you and release you for whatever you did, intentionally or unintentionally. I forgive you and I release you. When you expect nothing or want nothing in return, not even acceptance, then nothing is putting a barrier in your heart from your mind. So this reconnection is the ticket to your freedom. Allow this person to be there in warm compassion and patience in your heart with the jail doors open, letting any distance between you dissolve in mercy and compassion. And now allow this scene to gradually begin to fade away, but leave the jail door open and let them know they have permission to leave and know that they are now leaving. And know that you have finished your business with the one you are forgiven. And so you can now open your eyes and take a deep breath and just listen. There is an important difference between being forgiving of what someone has done and living in a state of forgiveness. Both are important, but a state of forgiveness is a continuous, ongoing, always present, unconditional spaciousness in your heart for the growth and evolution of the person you have forgiven. And this also includes yourself. What this means is you acknowledge that they, like you and everyone else, are dealing with their own issues, and they will progress over time to discover the core soul of goodness that lies within them. But for now, they're struggling, they're suffering, and you acknowledge that you have a space to allow them to grow at their chosen space. So with your jail now open, feel a lightness and a freedom and have the resolution to live in a state of forgiveness from this moment forward. I also have a simple and effective forgiveness practice called Ho'oponopono, and I have a short video on how to use it on my YouTube channel. It's called Ho'oponopono Advanced Practice. And if you want to go more depth into the subject of forgiveness, I have an audio program on my website called Deep Forgiveness. I'll see you next time. This is Jonathan Park.